on Crossfire.
Tojo had the greatest impact on World War II because he tried to start an empire like those attempted by Hitler and Mussolini. They had an incredible navy. They took island colonies in the Pacific that belonged to European nations and the U.S. The Japanese seemed invincible to the Allied forces. They forced the Allies to island hop to try to stop their conquests. Through Pearl Harbor, Japan brought U.S. into the war and showed themselves as a powerful force. Tojo was the leader that brought Japan to this power and brought the U.S. into the war.
Adolf Hitler was the most influential power in World War II because he was able to take over many countries without a lot of force. He was able to take over Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Rhineland without any resistance from these countries. He brought his own country out of the poverty that they were in through his influential speaking and rose as a great leader in a matter of a short time. And then he also had new military techniques such as the Blitzkrieg, which destroyed opposition swiftly. Hitler also started the Holocaust, which killed many people. He was the main reason that World War II started. He was the first one to invade other countries.
Joseph Stalin had the greatest impact on World War II when he joined the war because he had a very large military force, and if Stalin had not joined the war, Hitler would have been able to roll over a lot more of Europe without being weakened so significantly. Stalin also had a great impact because of his purge, in which he killed way more people than Hitler. Stalin killed the most people.
Did not.
Yes, he did.
Well, maybe, but of the whole country, Hitler had the most impact on the more countries than Stalin did. Because Hitler not only killed people in his own countries, but he also killed people in other countries. Like, the amount of Jews that remained in Poland after Hitler invaded was only 22%.
But Stalin killed 20 million Russian people, which was more than the number of Jewish people that Hitler killed.
Well, we had taken into consideration the percent of population. Russia had a greater population than Germany did. So if you can consider it's like percent population killed during it.
But I still don't think that 6 million German people getting killed compares to 20 million Russians being killed.
Well, I think Germany had a greater impact on Europe as a whole because Russia's so isolated that it impacted Russian culture and the direction Russia took. But Germany affected Europe as a whole.
I also think that Stalin impacted the world as Russia's place in the world because he brought Russia into European affairs and kind of ended their isolationism, which I think is a really important aspect of this.
He did, but yet Germany was the one who was basically instigated to bring Russia into the war with their non-aggression pact and saying that if Russia helped Germany take over Poland, they would give them land. So basically Germany brought Russia into the war.
Yes, they did, but Russia also, they did have the choice to stay out of the war, which would have been a very reasonable thing to do at their point, because they were, there was so much hunger, and they were, struggling with their communism, and I think that Stalin's decision to fight back against Hitler, which was, a big decision because of the power of his army, really altered the course of the war, choosing to enter the war, because Hitler fighting two wars, on the two different fronts, really weakened his army, rather than using all his forces against Great Britain.
Without Germany starting the war, would Russia have entered the world? So you can basically say that Germany brought Russia into the world by starting the war.
I disagree. I believe that with Stalin and Lenin's actions, even before World War II, Russia was already entering the rest of the world and ending their isolationism, and the war was a big step in that, but it wasn't their only step towards de-isolation. That's a word.
Okay.
Well, Japan also had a very great impact because instead of conquering land in Europe, they were conquering land in Asia. They were conquering a lot of colonies that belonged to European countries in the U.S., so that brought the war into the Pacific. And eventually, it led to Japan being threatened by the U.S. and bombing Pearl Harbor, which led to the U.S. coming into the war, which had a very great impact on the war as a whole.
Would you say that bringing the U.S. into the war, did that the reason that the war ended, or isn't that a different reason?
I think that it drastically changed the course of the war. I think that without the U.S. joining the war, the Allies would not have had, they would not have won as quickly as they did.
But even if like Japan hadn't attacked Pearl Harbor, would they eventually join the war anyway?
Maybe,
They were
but they
thinking
wouldn't
about
have joined
it.
as quickly.
Yes.
But they wouldn't have had reason to join. Because they were kind of just trying to stay there.
They were already helping Great Britain with their war effort, but they were not directly involved in the war at that point, and I don't think that without that attack they would have.
Well, Tojo attacked Pearl Harbor because he thought the U.S. was threatening to his military campaigns, which it was. So he wanted to get rid of a lot of the U.S.'s greatest aircraft carriers and stuff that was stored at Pearl Harbor. But then that led to the U.S. wanting to defend themselves.
Well, even though he brought the U.S. into the war, he didn't take over other countries. But he discovered a few in Asia.
He took over a lot of
Asia.
He took over a lot of colonies in Asia.
And a lot of land in China.
And China. He took over a lot of land in China, which was they were having civil war between, or not civil war, but war between China and Japan, which weakened Japan, which was one of the reasons they wanted to attack Pearl Harbor.
I still think Germany took over more land.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, so just the fact they took over Austria, Czechoslovakia, Rhineland without any resistance, and then they took over Poland, this part of the Soviet Union, and Romania, which I think is just more of an impact. I'm not saying that Japan didn't have a big influence on it, but just saying that Germany had more of an impact just because of the amount of total land they took over.
Then you have to look at the significance of that land they're taking over. All of the land that Germany was taking over, it had at one point been part of that German Empire, and they
Not all of it.
Oh, well, a lot of it had. A lot of it, in Czechoslovakia and the Rhineland, Germany felt like it was
At
theirs,
first.
which doesn't make it, it doesn't make it right, and yeah, it wasn't all of it. Just because, Japan took over less land doesn't mean that those, that conquering is insignificant or, less significant, because I feel like Japan taking, a lot of land from China and, those islands and from the US and Europe is really significant because it kind of showed people that Japan was a power.
I'm not saying that it wasn't significant, I'm just saying that in debating which leader was the greatest, Hitler was, just because of the pure amount of land he took over.
But I just, I don't know that, the amount of, square feet of land or square miles of land, I don't know if just that if that number is, purely dictates how much meaning it has, if you know what I mean.
I get that, but I also consider, in Europe, Germany taking over France, which was, another major player, and then looking to take over Great Britain, which if Great Britain had fallen, then Germany probably would have been able to take over the U.S. and other parts of the world, eventually world domination. You could argue that because Great Britain had the greatest military fleet of the area, with France being second. And if they had control of those ships, they would be able to do pretty much whatever they wanted.
I believe we're making some riches. I don't believe that Germany would have been able to conquer the U.S. no matter what. But that's off topic.
Stalin didn't take over any land. Because, some Poland, that's it.
But he did unify Russia, which is a significant feat because Russia, peoples and cultures within the Russian Empire, which Stalin united under communism, and they all starved together. However, not as peoples. Of these three leaders, Hitler was the least influential.
No. No.
Yes, he was.
No.
He may have instigated the war, but once the war had started, he was not the most influential leader to join it. I think that
just the fact that he started it, was the one who brought your two leaders into it. So you could argue that without Hitler starting the war, because he was crazy, then Stalin and Tojo would have been able to become as great leaders as they had because they did not have the reason to.
I disagree. I think that with the situation in the world at the time, the economic situation, totalitarian leaders were popping up all over the place. You can't say that Hitler caused Tojo and Stalin to come to power and to exhibit their power. I think that they would have done that either way because they were trying to show the strength of their individual countries.
The war allowed them to show that strength sooner than they probably would have.
I don't feel yes, Hitler may have by invading Poland, he technically started the war, but I also think that he was not the most important power in the war. I don't think that he was the most influential on the course of the war. I believe that it is Stalin.
No.
Because he controlled the great Russian power, economic power.
But they weren't that organized as a country, even under Stalin.
They were beginning to organize.
Their military wasn't that great.
They defeated Hitler's military, so his wasn't that great either.
Because Hitler was trying to fight like 2 wars.
That's his own fault because he's a terrible leader. Russia is the most important power, besides the US, in this time period.
No.
Huge manpower, there is a huge industrial power, they have a huge influence on the world.
They're isolated. They're
Just
not.
because they're
But they're coming out of their isolation.
doesn't mean like they can do stuff with the manpower. They don't have the right
But they
technology.
are! In this time period, they are
They're
doing
super
things with their
industrialized.
manpower. They're beginning to industrialize and come out of their isolation. Like, Russia is really significant because they're growing really quickly, and as is shown by history, the countries that are growing the fastest are, like, really important.
Hitler had the greatest influence on the war because he started the war, and then he also brought other countries into it by bringing Russia into it, and then he took over many other countries, killed a lot of people, which was really and decimated the population of many countries.
Well, Tojo was the most influential because he brought the U.S. into the war through bombing Pearl Harbor, which had a huge impact on the course of the war, and allowed the Allies to win much more quickly. Also, he conquered a lot of colonies that belonged to Europe and the U.S. and the Pacific, which brought the war into the Pacific as well.
Joseph Stalin had the greatest impact in the course of the war. He also had a great impact on mustache fashion.
It's going to help defend your point.
Fun facts. Everybody saluted the flag like this until after World War II, and then the US was like, crap, Hitler did that, we need to change it to this. Fun facts. Fun fact
So
history.
Hitler, another point, well, Hitler had to change the way people salute the flag. Yes.
That was Hitler's greatest impact on the world. We went from doing this when we said the Pledge of Allegiance to this.
Yes.
Boop, boop.